The next settings I would take a look at have to do with Safari. Safari does a pretty good job of blocking information and trackers between sites, and you can see some of that privacy information down here at the bottom. If we tap on our menu options, tap on our options again, you can even see a privacy report and other information. However, there's one setting I would typically look for to enable. If we go into our settings, then we scroll down to apps, then go to Safari. Within Safari, scroll all the way to the bottom, and you'll see Advanced. Within Advanced, we have Advanced Tracking and Fingerprinting Protection. This is something I would leave enabled. It may be off already or just for private browsing. I typically turn it on for all browsing. Basically, you can enable this to help keep your information as private as possible. It's a privacy feature that blocks complex methods websites use to identify and follow you. This can follow you across websites, it combines URL cleaning, and removes tracking codes with anti-fingerprinting, or makes it harder to get your device info. So if you leave that on, it just keeps things a little bit more private. There are a couple things I would recommend taking a look at and considering changing based on your overall use case. Now you'll see this little arrow here. This lets me know that something recently used my location. That's okay if specific apps use that, but you want to be aware of what those are. That can be found under Settings, again if we go down to Privacy and Security, this time under Location Services. Of course, you want to enable location services to use things such as Find My, navigation apps, or just locating you for specific things. If you don't want any of that, you can turn it off, but that will turn off some specific features. So the first thing is, in order to see this little arrow here so that we know that maybe locations were being used, scroll to the bottom, and you'll actually see under System Services, where we scroll to the bottom again, we have status bar icon. If that's enabled, you'll see a status here. It says show the location services icon in the status bar when the services above request your location. If you don't want to know about that, you can leave it disabled and you'll never see it. But if you do, it gives you a couple different things here. A gray arrow indicates that an item has used your location in the last 24 hours, and a purple arrow indicates that an item has recently used your location, so it lets you know. If we scroll back up in System Services, you'll see all of the purple arrows of things that have actually been used recently. Now, a lot of people recommend turning off significant locations and routes. However, I typically don't turn that off as it's used for navigation and suggestions. If you don't care about any of that, you can disable it. However, Apple does specifically say on their website that optimized battery charging will not work if this is off. However, some people have said it works anyway. But on Apple's website, they actually say if this is turned off, it won't work when it comes to battery. And if we go into significant locations and routes, I can show you that I have it on. At the top here, it says allow your iPhone and other iCloud connected devices to learn places significant to you as well as routes you take often in order to provide useful location-related information in maps, calendars, photos, and more. Your significant locations and routes are end-to-end encrypted and cannot be read by Apple. So that's why I leave it on. You may not want to leave it on, but I find it useful for certain services I use elsewhere. But if you don't need it, you can turn it off. Also on Apple's battery website, like I mentioned before, and on Apple's website, this says if optimized battery charging doesn't activate. If we scroll down here, you'll see the feature doesn't engage when your charging habits are more variable, when you travel, or you charge for short periods of time. Because of this, some location settings must be enabled for optimized battery charging to activate. And you'll see here where they actually show you to go to Settings, Privacy and Security, Location Services, and turn that on, as well as significant locations here under Step 3. So those things have to be on in order for that to work, so just keep that in mind. Back within System Services, if we scroll down, you'll see it has Product Improvement. Now, I have these disabled right now, but you may want to consider leaving some of these on. The reason for this is it says allow Apple to use your frequent location information to improve maps. For example, maybe you're using Apple Maps to travel, and along your route, it finds that there's a very heavy traffic area. This is how it's getting that information anonymously. So maybe you have routing or routing and traffic turned on, then it sort of anonymously sends that information to Apple. They know that it's busy in a specific area on a highway, and it lets you know in Apple Maps. That's how that works. So if you benefit from that, you may want to keep that on. If you don't, turn it off, and it won't be seen. All of the other things here could be very helpful, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend turning everything off. For example, Find My iPhone, you would want this enabled in order to find your iPhone using Find My. So just take a look at each one of these. They're pretty straightforward, but I typically leave most of these enabled. And on the location services page, you may want to customize this on a per app basis. Typically, I have these set up for while using. For example, the wallet, it may want to know the location so I could pay a vendor. That's pretty typical, so I have it while using. Certain applications I don't need. Other applications it's fine, again, while I'm using it. But other than that, I don't really need it using my location all the time. So it says while using and more for Apple Maps, as it needs to use that location to help give me that navigation information. So again, customize it on a per app basis. Again, if we go back into privacy and security, this time scroll down to the bottom and you'll see an option here for wired accessories. This is something I would customize based on overall use case. For example, currently it's set to automatically allow when unlocked. This allows things plugged into the USB-C port, such as a Mac, to automatically connect as long as it's unlocked. That's typically okay because I'm usually at home, and if I unlock this, it's going to be me and no one else. However, if you're concerned with this, you can have it set to always ask. So if I go ahead and plug in my Mac here that's connected to the other end of this USB-C cable, it will then prompt me to connect. It says allow accessory to connect. Do you want to connect the USB accessory to this iPhone? And it will only allow it to connect if you tap allow. So it will do that on a per device basis. We can trust it, put in our passcode, and it will never prompt us again. Now again, if we go back into privacy and security, another feature I would enable has to do with if your phone gets stolen or someone takes it out of your hand quickly and wants to change your passcode. If we scroll down to the bottom, there's a newer option called Stolen Device Protection. If we go into this, you'll see I have this enabled already, and it says require security delay when I'm away from familiar locations. Again, something utilizing the location information. It says a delay will be required when you are not at a familiar location, such as your home or work, to change security settings. If you have this enabled, you can have it set to always, but if you try to turn this off and you're not at home or your work or something familiar, it will then make you wait an hour to change the passcode. This should give you enough time to maybe get to another computer, a service center or something to either recover your device or lock it down even further. So this is something I would highly recommend enabling, is if you go to turn it off, I can turn it off, it asks for Face ID, then it's off. But if I have it set to always, it will give me a security delay. So if I do this, you'll see a delay will always be required to change security settings. If I turn it off now, it will then delay it, and it says security delay required to change stolen device protection. So you can start it or learn more. So they'll still have to take at least an hour to do that. Another thing I would recommend enabling has to do with locking down your data even further. If we go into Settings, tap on your name at the top. This time, if you use iCloud, go into iCloud and scroll down a little bit to the bottom. You'll see Advanced Data Protection. This is something I would recommend enabling as long as you have your private security key and you can remember it. For example, it says iCloud encrypts your data to keep it secure. Advanced Data Protection uses end-to-end encryption to ensure that the iCloud data types listed here can only be decrypted on your trusted devices, protecting your information even in the case of a data breach in the cloud. This means Apple and no one else has the advanced keys for this. So you'll see here, if we scroll down, you can recover your account, but you'll need your recovery key in order to actually unlock this. So if you can manage that key, keep that handy, print it off, put it in a safe,